Hey, welcome back. This is Kelly, your Kilted Therapist. Today I'm going to talk about something that is kind of popping up on my radar a lot, and this has a lot to do with some things that I'm hearing both in the therapy room as well as seeing in other places. And I'm going to talk about the difference between a non-professional who is giving, quote, advice versus somebody who is a paid professional who has specific training in a specific area. And I'm harping on this kind of because when I get clients that walk in and they start using a lot of the language from clinical therapy and its misuse, it signals me that people are actively involved in trying to understand what's happening for them, which is brilliant. They're also trying to actively engage with what's happening with them. Again, brilliant. The problem is when I dig down to find out where did you learn that, it's often from somebody who, like my high school softball picture, is somebody who maybe has some of their own experience, but they're not exactly professional. Contrast that, though, there are professionals that are on TikTok, there are professionals that are on a number of other platforms and mediums that give information. All of us preface this when we're professionals by saying this is not medical advice, this is not treatment, so to speak. This is for entertainment purposes, but it's also for educational purposes. The problem is that as I'm seeing when I start looking at other therapists, and I'm guilty of this too, so don't think that I'm throwing anybody under the bus or I'm being critical of anybody, because I'm also being critical of myself in this. We have a tendency to use language thinking that it's common and that other people share the experience that we have. That's our perception. And the difficulty with perception is that it's something that's filtered through our lens. It's something that we feel like because we know it, we're comfortable with it, other people must know this too, and that we therefore share that language, we share those experiences, and that we have that common background together. Problem is, we don't. Specifically, when I look at therapized language, one of the things that I hear is people walking in saying, that person's a narcissist, that person must be bipolar, or I hear people say, I saw on TikTok, this therapist said, okay, and what was the context of that? Because you're getting a 2-minute snippet of something that might be a much more complex problem, and this is well, let me rephrase that. This is intended to be an enticement to get you to explore more deeply. It's not intended to be a one-size-fits-all, everybody meets this criteria, and this is how neatly it flows. Now, I've got a picture there at a Padres game that I took of one of my favorite players in the outfield. Unfortunately, he went to another team. I hollered for him to come back. I don't know if he heard me. I hope he did. But the point is, a professional separates themselves from the novice. I've played softball since I was in kindergarten or first grade, and at 54 I continue to play. I don't play nearly as competitively, and I certainly don't play to the level that I once did. But I've got a lot of experience playing the game. When I was learning to play the game, just like Jake was, we both had to come through fundamentals. We had to deal with coaches who, some were really good, some were not so good. You're starting to see where I'm going with this. Some of those coaches actually did damage to us because they weren't professional coaches. Some of those coaches were dads or moms or somebody's uncle who said, you know what, I'll step in and I'll do this. They may have a base understanding of the game. They might sit down and actually take a look at the rule book to make sure that they're giving you good information before they walk into this. But most of them weren't really planning, and what they were looking at is, how do I make this team successful? But they were looking at success through a very different lens than the 7-year-old who's standing there at a batting tee looking at everybody in his bright, shining new uniform. That kid just wants people to see him and wants people to be excited for him when he gets a hit. I was no different. I loved it when I got a hit. I also loved it when I would first catch the ball. As I grew, though, in my skills, and this is the important bit here, as I grew in my skills, just like Jake, the more that he grew in his skills, somebody recognized there's a natural talent, but here's also somebody who is working hard at building those skills understanding the game, not just from an intellectual level, an emotional level, but also looking at the technical aspects of the game to see how they can improve performance. A lot of professional athletes consult with a professional psychologist, principally because we get stuck in our own heads, just like people who go to TikTok, go to YouTube, or go to anything like Dr. Google. You know, we're all looking for answers. The downside of trusting Dr. Google is this isn't a person who is doing a real-time assessment with you based on clinical research or based on things that we can point to say, this is probably more tangible for you. And when I say tangible, what I mean is this is probably more appropriate for you based on almost 200 years of study, research, experience by several others who have come before us. So when I think about the way that the game of baseball was played in the 1900s, about the Ty Cobb era, they had a 5-fingered glove that was just a piece of leather. It was designed to take the sting out of the ball, hitting your hand. They might have a little bit of padding in there. Usually it was lamb's wool. Eventually the glove changed because innovation changed, technology changed, but also because people realized that leather glove worked a whole lot better than a sweaty hand at trying to grasp something on a hot summer day. So you can see how professionalism developed over time. Well, so has therapized language, because with the advent of social media in the mid-20 aughts and teens, we started to see a proliferation of people who were getting out in front of people to say, hey, here's a service. Here's a way that you can begin to overcome this. Now, the challenge is it's kind of a one-size-fits-all. Now, when you look at the picture of me and my gi, I worked really hard that day to get stripes on my belt. And if you know Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you know that you have to roll with somebody in order to get promoted. And it often involves rolling for a very long time. So you're having to fight through fatigue. And here's how I'm going to come back to the difference between a professional and a non-professional. The guy that taught me, there were 2 of them, did a brilliant job of breaking down each of the aspects of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because my goal when I started this was I knew that as a woman, I don't have the upper body strength to fight a man. I need to be competitive, but I also need to be able to exploit my natural strengths. Even though I knew that was as much as I knew. And at the time that I was doing this in the mid-1990s, I didn't really know a whole lot about functional strength. I didn't know a lot about my body in terms of how to use it in a way that would be masterful and appropriate for meeting the challenges that I had when I was a young street cop. But I knew that if I got on the ground, I wanted to be able to cover down on my weapon, and I also wanted to be able to prevent somebody from doing more damage to me and hopefully overcome them in that fight. So I sought out somebody who had that specific training and who could bring me that expertise, but could also work with me through it, challenge me, coach me, and help me to learn the language. I didn't know what rear naked choke was. In fact, the first time I heard it, I chuckled, as we all do, because it's got the word naked in it. The other part of this, though, that was interesting for me is that there were drawbacks to doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as a woman. I've got a couple of things on my chest that can sometimes get in the way. I've also got longer hair, so I had to be careful about the way that I was showing up to do that rolling, and I had to learn all of these things. But all of those little adjustments, my coach, my master at the dojo did a wonderful job of walking me through this, because he could see things from a different perspective. He could also see it through the lens of his training, his expertise, his experience, because he was actually going and rolling with one of the Gracie brothers. So he's getting this from somebody who is at the pinnacle of their profession. That mentorship he passed down to me. Now, I don't currently roll. I've overcome some injuries, and because of moving and where I moved to, I didn't have the luxury of being able to have a partner or a mentor like I had in Battle Creek. So the drawback of that was I kind of had to let that go as a skill set. But also, like any skill set, the less we use it, the more we kind of lose it. So now let me go back to the therapized language. We can research something, or we can read something, we can hear something, or we can develop skills around that something, which means incorporating as many of our 5 senses as possible, 6 if you talk to me in another film, around how we get better at doing what we do in terms of managing mood, managing state, and then addressing behaviors that we do. It's like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We start out small, we learn a few skills. The thing is, we've got a lot of natural skills that we say, I don't have coping skills. Yes, you do. You did not get where you are without being able to cope. The problem is that sometimes those mechanisms that you use to get you through a particular period of time may not have grown with you, have not adapted with you, which means they're no longer working. But it doesn't mean that you don't have coping skills. You do. The other thing is, when I hear people say, we're going to teach people coping skills. No, you're not. What you're going to do is you're going to present information to people and give them an opportunity to decide what of that feels like that's going to work for me. Now, here's what I know, both from my own experience, and I imagine if you're honest with you, your experience too. Just like when I was doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, when it got really painful, when it got really difficult, when I came across somebody who significantly challenged me, there were moments when I thought, I'm not doing this. I can't do this. There's no way that's going to work for me. In fact, I was doing elevator once with a guy that was 3 times my size. I was floored because the only reason that I did it was because I couldn't think of anything else to do in the moment. I managed to make the move work. I don't know how I managed to make that move work because it certainly wasn't coming from me, except, and again, this isn't a self-aggrandizement because I was really weak against that guy. The only reason in my mind that it worked is because of the way that my coach had built those fundamentals with me, and because I paid attention and I worked on that as a skill, because I thought somehow this has got to work, and if I do it right, when it counts, it's going to work for me. I couldn't do that with every skill that he gave me. But again, picking, like I used to teach young cops when they were learning to use force on the streets. One of the things that I would tell them is pick 2 or 3 of these techniques, run with that. Because there's something known as the inverted U hypothesis. And the inverted U hypothesis says the more choices that we're confronted with, the more we become crippled by those choices. Because the mind is trying to figure out what is going to be the most effective thing. And when it's trying to do that quickly, it can't run through that litany as fast because not all of them are at the same level of introduction, inculcation, and effectiveness for us in enough circumstances where that would be our default. It takes a significant amount of emotional pressure and repetitiveness to lock that in as a skill. So moving forward, now let me talk about self-diagnosis. And this is one of the things that I find with non-professionals, especially influencers. Non-professionals will walk in and tell you all kinds of things. They'll tell you how to self-diagnose. They'll tell you do these affirmations. Incidentally, there's mixed reaction in the professional community about affirmations. Cognitive behavior therapists love these. I've never met anybody that could stick with them and make them work for them. Maybe that's my bias, but again, as a marriage and family therapist, I don't use cognitive behavior therapy except for the occasional reframe. That's it, out of that entire, because I recognize this isn't just about thinking. This is about emotion. So I have a different philosophy there. Again, not bagging on anybody that does CBT. There are a lot of people that think that it's highly effective. Good for them. But there's a confirmation bias that we encounter when we are listening to these influencers because we're looking for something that resonates with, that's how I feel. No, it's not. That's not how you feel. Your bias is, I'm looking at this person and I'm evaluating things based on things that line up with something that maybe at one time I thought, one time I felt, or behaviors that I do. Notice that there are 3 components to that are very different. The difference in that is that these influencers and these people that we're relying on to help us self-diagnose are not sitting in front of you. And your situation is not exactly like theirs. There may be similarities, but it's not exactly. Your life experience is very different than theirs. But the lens at the moment that you're perceiving and you're experiencing what they're telling you resonates with you. And I don't know, people have been using this word vibe. And I think the difficulty with this is it's kind of become a buzzword, but it's also kind of become a way of kind of vaguely describing something that falls into a category of experiences, emotions, thinking, behaviors that we think that are on point with us. And the difficulty with that is, on the one hand, we do have an electrical and chemical response when we're with other people. The downside is that sometimes it's because of cues in that other person that we're having those experiences because it's triggering something in us. So I realize I just got way deep into the weeds on that. But you need to know, just because you feel a, quote, vibe, end quote, doesn't necessarily mean that you're effectively connecting with that person, because some of that is that confirmation bias. Now, here's the other thing that you need to know. If I walk in and I say to my coach, I feel like I'm really weak when it comes to getting into that arm bar, from mount. That's a pretty broad description. There's a lot of ways that my coach can go from there. But if my coach says, why don't you go roll with somebody and I'll take a look at what you're doing, now we're getting away from that confirmation bias. The same thing is true when you sit with a therapist and you walk in and you say, I'm depressed. Well, tell me, what does that mean for you? Because depression has as many meanings, and once we understand that it's a state and a mood and not an emotion, you heard me right, is not an emotion. That state or mood is actually a level that we find ourselves at in terms of where our thinking has taken us, but also where emotionally we have gone. Think about it like this. There are a couple of different categories that this shows up in. And this is why I'm showing you a Highlander at one of the Highland Games. We can have an experience first thing in the morning. Something can transform that experience an hour later. It may be that we saw something on Facebook that made us sad. We may find that, we start to have thoughts about something that bothered us yesterday. Well, when we're thinking about the thing that bothered us yesterday, here's a better example. I've got a boat. You've seen on my channel here, there's a video of my boat. It's in sad shape. When I think about that boat, I could say that I get anxious because there's a part of me that needs a place to fix it. I don't really have the appropriate place to fix it. So the worry there, again, worry is a feeling word, not an emotion, but the worry there, because the underlying emotion is my fear. What if I can't find a place to fix this? What if it's going to take me another 5 years? Notice the language, notice what's happening there. That's how I get into an anxious state. Or if I start, if I go back to the example that I gave the other day of standing in line to get on a roller coaster, the more that I looked at that roller coaster, the language that I used with myself was, this is not good. And it was exceedingly negative language. So that took me into a hyper anxious state. Again, because the underlying emotion was fear. The anxious, I'm in the gamma wavelength. In that gamma state, my body is perceiving that there's significant risk, high danger, and that at some point it could be my life. That was, in its purest, most simple form, that's what was happening. So what does that mean? Well, when we talk about anxious, I wasn't so much anxious, I was afraid. But people use anxiety. They say, well, I've been thinking about this and, it's on my mind all the time. They start to talk quickly. Well, what is the underlying set of emotions under there? Fear, anger. And then we start to look at the feelings. Disappointment, fear of abandonment. We can go on. I don't want to belabor the point. But see, that deepening happens partly because of our self-talk, but also partly because if we haven't learned to regulate what we think and what we feel, we begin to label things in general terms. When I ask people how many days a week would you say that you feel like you're in a depressive mood? I hear 5, or I might even hear 7, and I'll say, well, how long does that mood last? All day, every day. Is there ever a time in your day when that does not show up? Now, for you therapists that might be looking at this, you know exactly what's happening here. Because when I'm asking, the person has to then evaluate and recognize maybe it's not showing up all the time. Does that mean that they have bad coping skills? No. But what it means is where my attention and my focus is, there goes my mind and my body. So the more attention that I pay to what am I feeling in my body? Am I coming down with a cold? Am I getting sick? The more that the body will start to look for those danger cues. Now what are we doing? We're triggering that gamma state, which is where commonly referred to as anxious. So can you see, though, how this chain happens? But then when you start listening to people who are influencers who want to give you advice on how to stop that, they'll tell you, well, just stop thinking about that. Go distract yourself. Well, you know, distracting yourself doesn't really deal with the fact that this is something that is becoming a pervasive pattern. When the brain gets into a pervasive pattern, that heuristic or that shortcut that is now being confirmed by bias tends to make it stronger, until it gets to the point where we begin to have panic attacks and we can't understand why. Well, because the antecedent to this is somewhere there's a kernel that grew into an entire stalk of corn with 5 ears of corn on it. We can't be surprised, because what we did is we fed that and we allowed it to become bigger because we didn't address it. Does that make sense? All right, so moving on. So how do we vet the info? Well, why are these domains and these people that are advice giving so pervasive, and what are they really doing? I don't think any of these people really want to hurt anybody, but I don't think they can also see that what they're doing is hurting somebody. I think that they're trying to give the benefit of their experience, just like I am here. I think we all want other people to benefit from our experience. We want them to find tools and resources and see that it is possible to overcome difficult circumstances. Now, here's another reason why the photo that you're looking at is so appropriate. Because every time that these guys throw, now they have to spin around a couple of times in order to get the momentum to throw the ball as far as possible. Well, if we think about it, to vet this, one of the things that we're looking at is, how do I get better at identifying somebody giving advice versus somebody who is providing me tools? Now, I realize that seemed like kind of a weird sentence, so let me see if I can clean that up. When I go talk to a friend and I say, this is something that I'm dealing with, if my friend's first instinct is to say, you know what you should do, probably not going to be something useful for me, because it's going to be something that worked for them, that was useful for them, might have only worked that one time, or there may be a component of that that they're not communicating to me or that I'm not ready to perceive that works for them fairly consistently. Does it work every time? No, nothing works 100% every time. But here's the thing to know. That doesn't mean that their advice is bad. It was good for them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's right for me. So how do I vet that? Well, the thing that I have to ask myself is, what about their advice meets my situation? How am I interpreting the advice that they're giving? Now, here's the contrast. As a professional, not my job to give you advice in the therapy room. That's not what I do. It's up to you to come up with a solution. I can give you suggestions of things that have worked for other people and say, these are some tools or skills that other people have used. And this is why I think I get frustrated so much when I hear people say, well, we're going to teach them coping skills. What are you really teaching them? Because the plain and simple fact of the matter is, just because somebody put down on a piece of paper, and I'm going to use Jen Sweeten for a minute. I love her work. I think she does a brilliant job. She does a titration exercise. This titration exercise, though, is different than teaching somebody a coping skill. And here's the difference. In Jen's exercise, she's asking you, identify what are the situations or events that cause you to get really angry? What are the events or situations that cause you to feel really sad? Put them on this titration chart. It looks like a thermometer. And then what she's doing is she's asking you, when was a time when you used a skill that helped you to take that temperature down on that, or to bring that temperature up on that? So she's not so much teaching you a skill as much as she's getting you to reflect back and look at, when have I been successful at this? And then pulling on that success to say, how do we modify the existing mechanisms that you've used so that they become more fluid and adjust with new situations, new incidents, etc. Now, the downside to this is some people don't present it this way. They'll present it and say, what you need to do when this happens. And that is not a good thing. That's giving advice. So I think that helped, and maybe I got a little bit off track with that, so I apologize if I did. So let me see. I'm going to take it in this direction just for the sake of argument. So another way to look at developing skills in learning to adjust to new things is to recognize when a person is giving advice versus when somebody is really being a sounding board and saying, have you considered this? Because my goal for you would be to recognize that sometimes you really just need a sounding board. You need to be able to hear it coming out of your mouth, because as clients have said to me over the years, man, when I say it out loud, it sounds so different and it kind of sounds foolish. Or the way that I handled that last time, that was probably really pretty bad, wasn't it? That's a very different conversation than you need to go do this and you need to tell them this and excuse me, we need to go do that. No, you don't. Because you're not likely to, and you're certainly not going to put into effect the same things that that person did and achieve the same results. At least it's exceedingly rare that you would. So moving on, why are TikTok chat rooms deceptive? Again, because it's 2 minutes. You're getting a 2-minute snippet of something that it took that person the better part of 4 years to learn and then begin to build skill on, but they're also interpreting something that was presented to them by somebody else. Does that make sense? So vet the information. Get critical of it, not from the standpoint of dismissing it whole, because there may be something in there that you hear that you're like, you know what, I think I could try that. That may work for me. So there is some benefit there. So moving on from vetting and why these rooms are so deceptive. The thing is, like I said, I don't think that these are people that are trying to be deceptive. I think the fallacy is that we're looking for answers, we're looking for quick tips, we're looking for something that is magic bullet in a can, or as we used to refer to it when I was a cop, and as karate in a can. It's a one-size-fits-all, one-time thing that's going to solve everything for whatever, forever. It doesn't work that way. And the difficulty with us is that we like things simple, neat, and easy, and we don't want to put the work in. So then why and where do we check out what we hear? The why and the where is just as important as the what. The why and the where. The why we need to check out what we're hearing is because we need to make sure that we're not hearing somebody's personal opinion about something that could be a medical condition. Because here's the thing that a lot of people don't really talk about. In probably about half of the cases of presentation to a clinical therapist, people are experiencing some type of a medical issue. Now, if you're over 60, you may be having a urinary tract infection. That can lead to temporary memory loss. That can lead to difficulties with administrative function, meaning being able to make decisions, being able to remember things. I mean, there are a whole host of things. If you're diabetic, there are also issues that are contingent that impact your mental health. Often because of the precursors of the diabetes that are acting on the way that the cortisol and the way that the norepinephrine and the body's system functions. It is constantly trying to pull, but it is constantly being starved until it gets another sugar. And the body does all kinds of things to try to regulate, to keep the body in balance. As a result, though, people can feel a lowered mood. They can feel sad for no apparent reason. They can feel lethargy or very little energy. They may lose interest in doing things. And a lot of this is tied to the fact that their body is trying to heal, and it doesn't want all of that extra stuff to have to focus on in order to be able to get through the day. It is just trying to fix what's happening internally. And, here again, even though I diverge from the medical model, I recognize that there are an awful lot of things that we do to our bodies that create these states, particularly anxiety and depression. Now, I love that I listen to people who talk about anxiety and depression as though this is a label, this is a lifestyle, and you're just going to have to learn how to manage it. No, you don't. You don't have to learn how to manage it. What you need to do is you need to recognize the root cause. Is the root cause something biological? When we're talking about a population with obesity based on current standards put out by both the Food and Drug Administration, by federal nutrition standards groups, as well as special interest groups. Special interest groups need you to be fat, sick, and tired so that you don't question, but you just continue to spend your money there. Well, if we look at healthy lifestyles, and this I think is interesting, one of the things that I got behind was carnivore after trying to live a more healthy lifestyle and looking at why I knew I was coming into menopause, so there were some things that I knew I was facing as challenges, and I wanted to not have to work as hard to get through those challenges. There again, me trying to find a path of least resistance. Well, what it came down to was simple. I needed to make some lifestyle choices, but I also needed to examine my lifestyle from a specific lens of what are the actions and behaviors and beliefs that I have around the way that I am living that are contributing to me feeling fat, because I was. I'm still overweight, but I'm in that process, because even though I do it, I fall off, I get right back on, because I understand how much better I feel when I'm doing it the way that I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not saying that carnivore is for everybody. It is a lifestyle. It doesn't have to be. I started out using it as a 90-day elimination to address some things. But what I found is that the more that I do that, the healthier I feel, principally because most of the foods that are commercially available to us are full of sugar. Well, ask yourself why. Because somebody benefits from that. And it ain't you. Pardon my language. So the way to overcome that, though, is to also recognize what is food's impact on the way that our minds and our bodies work. Once we understand that, we also need to understand that there has never been a time when we have been as sedentary as we are now. The fact that this recent industrial revolution, the fourth industrial revolution or the fourth turning, has invited in an era where we're sitting in front of computer screens all day, that's not how we were intended to live. Our bodies were designed mechanically to be moving in order to keep joints lubricated, in order to facilitate a healthy metabolism, in order to facilitate a healthy mind. So, again, looking at these things, this is why we have to really vet the information that we're getting. Well, I spent the better part of a year looking at keto, ketovore, paleo, carnivore, Atkins. I looked at Mediterranean diet. I looked at you name it. I was into it because shortly before I left Michigan in 2009, I had done Bill Phillips' Body for Life. I was eating 5 times a day. That's too much. But in the moment, it was working for me because I substantially lost weight. I was in the gym 6 days a week. I felt good. My body was moving. And at that time, it was doing the things that I wanted it to do. And I didn't have to give up a lot of the things that I enjoyed. Ice cream. I didn't have to give that up because I could eat Skinny Cow because it was a healthy snack, right? No, it's not. But the thing is, in that, I began to realize that it takes a lot of work to meal prep and to keep that up. Well, I was copping. I was working part-time for the Sheriff's Department, part-time for the U.S. Marshals. I was exhausted. I didn't have time to sit down and do all that meal prep. So at one point, I went back to eating sugar cookies. Thank you, Eileen's. I loved you. You were my best friend when I was in South Dakota because it was also a stress relief. So can you see, though, how this happens? Because instead of maintaining the lifestyle, I fell back into doing the very behavior patterns and habits that got me to a point where I needed that alternative lifestyle of eating healthy foods. But see, when I was eating a portion of protein and a portion of carbohydrates the size of my hand, and I was doing that 5 times a day, what my body was getting was the fuel that it needed, but it was missing the saturated fats because it wasn't complete. So I was still craving sweet. And there was a company, ISS, oh yeah, made a chocolate bar, a peanut butter chocolate bar that had protein in it. Well, because you're putting a highly processed powdered protein into chocolate, and then you're adding peanut butter, which is full of mold, and we're putting that together. We're commercially packaging that. It's got other things in it to give it a shelf life. You can see how quickly, and because I got that little bit of sweet, I fell off. I couldn't maintain it. So I had to go back and re-examine, what am I doing, what's working, what's not working. And periodically, if I have sweet, like if I treat myself to a piece of pie at Thanksgiving, if I indulge in other circumstances, for a special occasion or what have you, I have to work exceedingly hard to not fall back into those patterns, which, if I'm seeing a lot of clients in a week and I've got a significant number of clients who are requiring a lot more of me mentally and emotionally, I fall back into that. I go back into my 2-cookie-a-day habit. So the thing that I'm trying to get across to you is this is why it is so important that you vet the information. Vet me. Take a good look at me. Take a good look at how I deliver therapy. There are some people who think that I do very well. There are other people who are like, don't go to her. That's okay, because I'm not for everybody. But no therapist is for everybody, and therapy's not for everybody. Again, that's okay. Vet me. Vet the information that I give you, because a lot of this stuff is rooted in anecdotal information, observations and experiences that I've had, but it's also rooted in material that I've read that is grounded deeply in science. So moving along, who's trustworthy and why? Ask yourself, what is the reputation of this person? Now, here's the fallacy. There's a bias that if I'm wearing a white lab coat while I'm telling you these things, you're going to be like, she's the expert. I'm not the expert. In truth, there is no such thing as an expert. You can't conceivably know everything that there is to know that is going to apply to every potential situation and in every potential emotional experience, life experience. You just can't. So in truth, there really is no such thing as an expert. You got people who have been going down the wrong path, but their bias keeps them moving in that path. This is where one of the things that I appreciate about my profession is that as a marriage and family therapist, I'm encouraged regularly to self-reflect and say, is that still true? Is that still good information? Like when I listened to Andrew Huberman talk to David Goggins a couple of days ago, what makes Huberman an expert? He's a neuroscientist. But does that mean he's an expert? He's got a lot of experience in neuroscience. He works really hard to be careful of his bias. He's very careful. But there's something called observer bias. That can lead us into false traps. There's also something that happens because we begin to become full of our own ego. Because there's a part of us that says, I'm getting the results that I want in the pursuit that I have. Well, the thing is, if I'm getting the results that I want in the pursuit that I have, I also have to be careful of the fact that I might be deceiving myself and I may be skewing those results, which is why you vet the people. Commonly, what is happening with this person and what about this makes sense? Where are they pulling that research and that information? Because we all know in a publish or perish world, there are a lot of people that will manufacture things in order to get them published. We also know that the people that are publishing those things are accepting an awful lot of money from people who have a vested interest in shaping the way that science moves. Now, whether you agree with me or you disagree with me, I invite you to challenge that for yourself. Go looking for the evidence to refute me. And if you're happy to, I'm happy to review it. Put it in the comments. I'd love to see your evidence. And I'm not saying, show me your work. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is if there's something that I am telling you in this video that you don't agree with, or any of the videos that I produce, and you've got a way to demonstrate to me that's an absolute fallacy, don't listen to Kelly. I'm happy to entertain it because I'm also happy to examine what is my bias in this area and then correct it. And I will come on here and tell you I was mistaken. Because the thing is, I'm fallible. I can be mistaken. But that's important for you to know for a couple of reasons. Because the thing is, again, my goal is not to lie to you. Second thing is, I want you to find the truth and I want you to find a way to feel better in the way that you move through your world. So, again, credentials, sometimes they can mean something, sometimes they can't. The recent spate of educators that we're seeing who are doing behaviors that you may or may not agree with, it's been happening as long as there have been institutions. There are always people who are going to fudge and say that they've got more credentials, they've got more experience, they've got more education, more training, whatever the case may be. So we have to really be careful about how much of the information we take. Maybe a good suggestion, some people might call this advice, is to take everything with a grain of salt and examine it. But don't just take it in and go, yeah. Whoops. Take it in and say, wonder what about that's true? Wonder what about that's not true? A difficult premise, and I learned this at law school, argue the opposite side with yourself. And put it on paper or put it on camera. Because what it forces you to do is step outside of your comfort zone and examine what about this could be true or not true. And the best example of that is When we challenge ourselves, what we're also doing is we're getting away from some of that bias, but we're also looking at ourselves from a new perspective and giving ourselves an opportunity to be comfortable with the fact that we could be wrong. I've been wrong about a lot of things. When I first got into delivering therapy, I was absolutely convinced of two theoretical orientations as being supreme over all of the others. Guess what? They're not. They're equal, because these are styles of delivery and there are ways of connecting with people that resonate with people. We tend to seek out people who are more like us, and we tend to work with people who are more like us. We find more success with those people because we do feel a connection, and when there's authenticity around that, we tend to find results. So that's why therapy isn't for everybody and it doesn't work for everybody. So moving along, the point of fit and being honest. When we're trying to be fit for purpose, it requires us to get as brutally honest with ourselves and with those around us as possible. Now, that doesn't mean that you walk up and say, the last year at Thanksgiving when you started talking about this, that really made me angry, and I really don't like you because of X, Y, and Z. That's not what I'm talking about. What I mean is, are we finding resources and information that simply fits a narrative, or are we looking to find out where we fit in some of those narratives and then deciding, what about that do I need to explore a little bit further? And then the fit for purpose is, if there's something in there that is purposeful for me, how do I introduce that into my life so that I can begin to move in a direction that is going to be better for me? And I'll tell you something that probably 99, maybe 92% of the population never do. They never spend any time long enough examining what is happening for them in a difficult circumstance to say, what about this? It's hard to step outside of ourselves because we're so afraid of the emotional experience, and we're so afraid of social stigmas, we're so afraid of damage to our egos that we lose sight of us. So I caution us, if I go back to the example of me going out bow hunting and my nephew telling me, you got to watch out for bears. Well, there's not a social stigma there, but there is a perception that something really bad is going to happen to me if I step out there and suddenly encounter a bear. What is the likelihood of that happening? I have no idea. But the thing is, it went through my mind. Now let me contrast that. Last night I sat in a board meeting and I'm listening to people. Some of these people are colleagues. They're in the field of therapy. Some of these are parents. Some of these are other professionals in the community that are coming to have a dialogue about a particular issue. And I found myself evaluating, who am I lining up with? And as I thought about that, I thought that's dangerous because emotionally, I want to be liked by that group. So I want to make the right decision because that would reflect well with that group. That's a bad premise, given the position that I'm in when that's occurring. So what I had to do is I had to suspend that and catch myself and tell myself, whoa, wait a minute. I'm here not for them. Excuse me. I'm here for the best interest of a group that doesn't particularly have an advocate that is specifically designed for them, that has their best interest in mind, because all of those people in that room had a vested interest in something that mattered to them, just like I do. So I had to weigh the emotional cost of that, and then decide how much of an outlier do I want to be in an in-group, because there were disparate groups in that room, people with different philosophies, different ideologies, different educational backgrounds, different lifestyles, and different experiences of how they achieved that lifestyle. So like them, I'm evaluating what is the reaction in the room to what I'm saying and what I'm asking. Now, the hard part is I still have to make a decision and render that decision in that meeting. And then talking about it afterwards with somebody from the standpoint of, help me to understand where my bias is. That was significantly beneficial for me because it also gave me an opportunity to kind of step back and say, all right, emotionally, I got sucked into this camp. I've got to stop that. I've got to step back and say objectively, as much as I can, what now? The same thing is true of good therapy. And the same thing is true of these people that you're looking at on TikTok, on YouTube. In all of these sources that you're getting information from, what are they telling you? Does it resonate with you? What about that? How do I challenge that? How do I know that that's okay? And then the last thing, and I'll wrap this up because, again, this got a little bit longer than I had anticipated. And if you're with me so far, great. Love it. When social media is being put into your system, ask yourself, how come I keep turning to this as an answer? Socially, we're impaired now. We don't go to people because of fear of being rejected, fear of being labeled, fear of having an antithetical opinion that might lead to a rejection. And sometimes it's simply because we don't want to look stupid. I look stupid on a pretty regular basis. I ask really dumb questions, but sometimes when I'm asking those dumb questions, there's an underlying purpose. So here's my really dumb question. You're watching me. And maybe you're watching me purely for the entertainment because, let's face it, I'm entertaining. I get it. And I'm okay with that. I wear a kilt. Sometimes I do foolish things like, teach people cold water survival training. And I talk a lot about things that most people are like, why would you do that? That's okay. Like, I used to go faceboarding. You're laying down on a boogie board in a class 4 set of rapids with 2 wetsuits on, fins, knee pads, elbow pads, goggles, and gloves, and you're shooting down a river. Yeah, I like that. So you're asking yourself, what am I doing this for? Why am I mindlessly scrolling? Why am I TikToking? Ask yourself, what am I avoiding? Because the thing that you'll find at the root of this is there's something you are avoiding. But if you're really honest with yourself, it's because there's an emotion or a set of emotions and some experiences that you had been thinking a lot about, maybe worrying about because there's an underlying fear or because there is something happening that feels like it's outside of your control. Get real with it. Sit down and write it down. And the thing is, sometimes once you look at it, you're exposing it. Sometimes it doesn't always last in the sunlight. It burns off. So I say all that to say thank you for watching. Oh, and avoid echo chambers. Because if we just keep hearing the same thing and thinking, I'm great, everything is fabulous, until we walk into that telephone pole because we were looking at our cell phone. Just something to be aware of. All right. Well, I'm Kelly, the Kilted Therapist. And if you like this video, give it a like and a thumbs up, and then share it. That's how we grow. All right. Thanks. Have a great rest of